Hello everybody and welcome back to the Ultimate Power Tool Workbench series. In this video we're going to get all of the panels cut to size between the frames and hopefully get it looking a little bit more like a workbench. Let's get going. Now before we get into any of this, if you've got the plans for this or you're going to be purchasing the plans once this series is complete, a word of warning about the cutting list or cutting lists in general. When making frames such as what we did in the last episode out of solid wood, basically the barrier to go around the panels, you can work to the cutting list pretty accurately. But when it comes to the panels in between, I tend to look at the cutting lists as a guideline because sometimes you'll cut something to the exact dimensions that you have on the cutting list, but when it comes to put it in the frame, it may be a little bit too big or a little bit too small by the tiniest fraction. And the reason for that is because you haven't measured directly off the frame that you created before. You might have accidentally cut that 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter too big or small. And by following the cutting list, you're assuming that you got that last step correct. So what I'm saying is before cutting any of the panels to size by following this cutting list, just double check the measurements of the frame that you have made and see if it corresponds to the cutting list. If it doesn't, make it fit the frame. So I had to leave in a bit of a rush the other day and I kind of just disassembled the whole workbench and chucked it here. Now it's in, it's a right old mess. There's no sort of order here. Some of the joints have dominoes in. Need to do a quick organise and then we'll get measuring to fit the panels in. So what I've got here are frames B and C because these are the easiest ones to work with as they only have 3 sides of the frame to them. But the reason I'm doing them first is because the sheet material that I'm putting within this frame is going to have one exposed edge on it. Now originally I was going to use birch ply to fill out these frames, but it's quite costly and it's just a bit overkill. And I want something quite interesting to look at as well. Like MDF obviously looks flat. Plywood's got a bit of a grain on it, but it's quite expensive. There's a few other options, but at the end of the day, I really like the look of OSB. I know it's controversial. A lot of people are giving me stick for using OSB around my whole workshop, but it just looks really cool and it just gives some sort of visual interest to it and it's cheap. So for a workshop project, it's ideal. The only issue being, like I said, within frames B and C, there is one exposed edge. And if that edge was subject to being knocked or dragged along the floor, for example, OSB is going to break out really badly on that edge. So I need to put a bit of solid wood lipping on there. And having that on there will protect the edge from splintering and just make it last a little bit longer. I would have done this even if it was plywood or MDF, but it's especially needed for OSB, in my opinion. So firstly, we're going to get these frames clamped together and see what those internal dimensions are and if they correspond to the cutting list. So we've got a lovely sheet of 6mm MDF. Oh my Lord, I need an air filter for in here. So this is going to be our base of all the cutting. Now it's worth saying it's only safe to do this if you have a plunge saw and you can precisely set the depth of cut you want. I don't want to be cutting through this into the concrete floor below, so make sure you double check your depth stop before every cut you do on this. Let's see if one of these panels fits. So as I said, I've reduced the height of it in order to get more out of the sheet. Lovely. So the glue I'm going to be using to attach this lipping is Titebond No Run No Drip. It also comes under another name, Quick and Thick. All it is a slightly thicker consistency than their standards 1, 2 and 3. And I find it's really good for sticking lipping onto the ends of sheet material, because sheet material likes to drink up glue quite a lot. And if you put something more watery on there, you get a dry joint very easily. This stuff is more like paint in a way, and it doesn't soak in as easily, and therefore there's always enough glue in your joint. So, there has been a small issue with this panel that I've been lipping, and it's down to this. This thing, when I measured the panel from front to back, it said it was, hang on, I've forgotten what measurement it said it was. It said it was 1,176 millimeters. Well, actually it was this way as well, but you get the picture. It said it was the measurement that I was after. I cut it spot on to those lines, spot on with the guide rail. Measured it again with this across the width. Yep. Still looks pretty good. Then when I come to fit it in the frame, initially I said it was a very good fit, but that's because the legs on the frame were slightly tapering in, so it was pinching on the bottoms there and feeling like a really good fit. But if I was to just look up a little bit, there was about a millimeter gap at the top of the panel where it wasn't quite meeting the legs. So what I've done is come back a few days later after my shift at work, hence the logo here. And at the end of the previous day, I stuck a bit of veneer on the edge, which is 0.6 millimeters thick. And I've done that on both ends. So essentially I've got 1.2 millimeters added onto either side. And this has made up the width that I want. Because like I said, if I measured this with this tape measure, it says it is 608 millimeters spot on. If I measure it with my ruler, which I have put a lot of trust in over the years and have got very good results from, it says 600 and just over 607 millimeters 0.25 or something stupid like that. And this ruler I know is accurate. This is relatively new. I used it to fix up places around this workshop to do a bit of work at home. I found out that although it's good for rough carpentry bits and things like that, for precision work, this isn't as accurate as I want it to be. So let that be a lesson to you if you are going to do something like this. Don't always trust your tape measures. And I know this is something that will probably never be seen. At the end of the day, it's 1 millimeter gap in a shop project. I really shouldn't care, but I think having pride in your work is very important, whether that's something that you just sort of slap in together or something that you're taking a lot of care with and you want the finished result to be good. If I had that millimeter gap in it, it would have annoyed me for years. So I've put in the extra effort to close up that gap, and hopefully this will fit a lot nicer. That's looking better. Yes. So previously, it was right along here, the gap was visible. As I said, because the legs were pinching in a bit because of the pressure of the clamp that I put at the back, it looked like it was a really nice tight fit down here, but I didn't check on the back corner here, and that is where the gap was. Now, that is lovely and closed up, or that final bit will once I close up the gap on the corner there with a clamp. And as for this side, once again, once the gap at the top corner there closes up, that will be a nice tight fit as well. And of course I took the time to sand these internal faces before gluing it all together because it's easier to get access to all these internal corners before assembly. And yeah, you don't need to sand these faces, but I just hate the feel of that disgusting finish they put on OSB. It takes like 40 minutes to strip it off. I started with a 40 grit disc just so I could get rid of that layer, flush off the lipping, and then I jumped straight to 180 grit with the mesh pads, and that's a good enough finish. That's all I need. It's never ever going to be felt by anyone at all because it's encased in the entire table, but knowing it's done properly is nice to know. So at this point, we need to start working out the domino locations to attach this panel within this frame. And if you are building this alongside me, or after this series is filmed, whatever, you need to remember to domino this panel, joint this panel, so that it's jointed to the side with the dominoes in the legs. So that it's flush with the side of the legs that have the dominoes within them, or the side of the legs that has the stretcher coming out of it. It is not being jointed onto this back edge here. Oh, hello there again. It's now a few days later, and let this be a lesson to you to not work late at night after a long day's work. Because when I was dominoing these frames with the OSB in the center, what I didn't realize was that I forgot to lock the bed on the domino. So basically, every time I was plunging, it was essentially plunging lower and lower as I went round. Luckily, this didn't break through on the OSB, but on the frames here, it got to a point where it's just started to expose beyond the edge of the OSB. Luckily, it's on the inside face, so you're like hardly going to see it, but yeah, I've just gone round, plugged them all, and now I'm cutting them all down with my spare Japanese saw. Lesson learned. Right, so all the ones on the wooden frames are plugged and flush, and we're back to where we were all those days ago. So because the ones on the OSB haven't blown through the edge, they're just a little bit off center. There's no point in plugging those because you're never going to see it. What I'm going to do is just up the size of the domino to the 5x30s. This will just make the hole a little bit bigger. It'll be central in the OSB again, and we will pretend that nothing even happened. Providing I remember to lock down, I don't know, it'll be the tilt this time, won't it? There you go. It's amazing what being awake can do. So it fits lovely in there. That's only with 2 clamps. I'm probably going to end up putting 3 across the width and then maybe 3 down that way as well. This is a dry fit. Always do a dry fit before putting glue on things, because if there's any massive issues, it's a lot easier to take it apart without glue on it, funnily enough. So always dry fit it. Now we're just going to load it up with glue and yeah, leave it drying. All right, so now I need to cut out the rebates that are in frame A and D, which will accept the bottom panel and will add a little bit more strength to the overall thing. So originally I was going to do this on the router table, but my rebate cutter, I bought one especially for the job, without measuring it. My rebate cutter isn't actually deep enough to do this entire rebate because it is quite a big chunk of material to get rid of. A spindle moulder would do it easy, but this is where the limitations of a router table lie. So instead, we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. I say the old-fashioned way with my nice big powerful router. We're going to do it with a hand router. Now in frame A and D, there are some adjustable shelves that I need to get installed before gluing the frames together. So I've got a marking gauge here, and I'm going to score up the inside and the outside of one of the frames so that I can set up a fence on my pillar drill and hit those lines exactly. Doesn't matter too much about how much offset you leave for these holes off the edge of the timber, but the dimensions that I'm using or the spacing that I'm using will be listed in the plans at the end of this series. So I have no idea why, but when drilling out shelf pins, apparently, I think it's a good idea to drill straight through the component for a shelf pin that's going to go in about 6 mil. Absolute idiot. I've now got holes blowing out the front of frame A. That's not good, is it? Fortunately, the back leg on frame D is exactly the same as frame A. So, frame D, or the back leg on frame D, is now the front leg on frame A, and even more fortunate, remember previously when I spent all that time getting the grain matched and everything like that? This leg looks pretty much the same as the front leg on frame A, so all that effort we went through previously has not gone to waste. Incredibly lucky there. All right, now it's time to fit the back panel that's going to fit within frame A. So I've clamped it all together to ensure I get my finished size, and we'll cut something to fit this. All right, so that fits in there spot on, gorgeous. And that is going to be flush with, well, it's going to be placed where it is now. So this entire section is going to be shelves and stuff in here, which means that I need to domino this to the inside of this frame. All right, so we're just about to domino these out, and we're going to be using the 4x20 dominoes, which are the smallest ones that Festool do. What I've done here is change the setting on the domino from a snug fit, like it is here, to a fit that has a little bit more tolerance on it side to side. So it makes the slot slightly wider than the domino that you're using, which is perfect for frames like this, once it all goes together obviously. But it's perfect for this when you want a little bit of side-to-side adjustment in there just in case things haven't properly lined up. It's also handy to have that slightly wider slot if you were to do an edge joint like this and you wanted to do dominoes along the entire length of it. It is possible to get them all in line, but it's also quite nice to give yourself a little bit of tolerance just in case one of them's slightly out, which will resist both of these pressing together. All right, I think I'm gonna call it there for this episode. The final frame is being glued up, and in the next episode I can get attaching the cross stretchers as well as the bottoms and everything and make these more cabinet-like. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far. Don't forget to like the video if you liked the video. Leave any comments if you have any suggestions or you have any questions at all. And if you want to support the channel, be sure to visit my Patreon page below or buy some t-shirts or whatever in my store, also linked in the description. So thank you for watching. See you in the next video.